You know, if we want to get real technical, AZ's Floette probably whoops everything on this list, but I'm gonna act like that isn't relevant. And yeah, I will admit, I've done this before. Consider this a bit of a sequel to that video from 2 years ago. A new generation has happened, new fully evolved Pokemon have come out, and now so have their pre-evolutions. So today, we're gonna simply make a new list, one that is more up to date about the strongest not fully evolved Pokemon, whether they be a first stage evolution or a second one. So that way I don't have to say Eviolite 10 times. Assume anything involving it goes without saying. And this also includes the move Knockoff, because yeah, these are all knockoff targets. Of course, I will be looking at these mons from the context of every generation, not just the current one, since some Pokemon did lose tools in Generation 9 that hinder their viability, and it doesn't feel fair. Although I will probably mention how some of them are doing in the current gen, just to cover my bases. Now, real quick, let's have that honorable mention lightning round. Honorable mentions include Kadabra, Haunter, Dusclops, the Mini Weather Setters, Combuskin, Dunsparce, and the Sneasels. With that out of the way, let's get started. Also, Mismagius, worst team. Thank you. It feels wrong to make a not fully evolved list and not put type Null somewhere on it. Yeah, I know I'm not Silvalley's greatest fan in terms of how strong it is, because it really isn't, and I'm not taking it back. I think as an NFE, type Null is at least decent. I might be overhyping it out of pity, but I see potential here. It's got the means to be played as a bulky Swords Dance sweeper, with stuff like Shadow Claw, Normal Stab, and whatever fourth move. It can be a support pivot with U-turn, and then your choice of status moves, and even Magic Coat to punish a hazard attempt. And it can be played as a special attacker, but you really shouldn't. But hey, I am sure that Icy Wind has a use somewhere, and I'm not going to be the one to find it. Regardless, I think it's fine enough at what it does to be number 10 on this list. Why isn't it higher? Well, despite its definitely fine stats, the other NFEs have typically outperformed it, because they at least have more specialized tools that let them fill roles better than it would have filled, sadly. So this is another situation where Magneton is on the list because it's actually had a solid niche in a higher competitive tier for exactly what you'd expect. Before Magnezone was a thing, it was a star player in Generation 3 OU due to its ability to trap and remove Skarmory before it could get up a layer of spikes. Nowadays, it's a bit of a lower tier Pokemon, but it still makes good use of its traits in those tiers to trap steals and function as a solid offensive Pokemon. While base 70 isn't the greatest, base 120 special attack is still good. And this is a type combination with only 3 weaknesses, so it's bound to be able to get something done, even if it's still a little carried by Magnet Pool. I'll always hold the firm belief that Doublade is a menace. Yeah, just like Magneton and most of the other Pokemon on this list, it's gonna be in the lower tiers. But the fact that it's seen play in a tier with weaker legendaries and fully evolved Pokemon shows just how much merit it has. Being a bulky Pokemon with Swords Dance and Shadow Sneak and a base 110 attack stat is gonna do you some favors. It's also got a really good 150 base defense stat, making you really good at taking hits from that side of the spectrum. Its special defense is pretty meager, so you are going to have to make sure to weaken the powerful special threats from the opponent's team before trying to get it in. Otherwise, you'll find yourself being KO'd by a Fire Blast before you know it. But don't let that fool you. Doublade is a really good late game cleaner, and if I see it in team preview in the lower tiers, I'm gonna make sure to account for it. Never thought I'd see the day where Ursaring is on the list, but seeing it used has given me some appreciation for it. The base 90 HP and base 130 attack, along with defenses that would be okay at best, if not powered by it, it's kind of become a pretty alright Pokemon with Ursaluna around, because it has access to some rather neat tools like Trailblaze, and then the usual stuff. You'd think you'd be forced to run Flame Orb on it. And you can if you want, but with all the status that gets flung around, you can just chill out with your Eviolite and let the status come to you so you can get your guts boost for those facades that are guaranteed to be on the set. I've also seen Sleep Talk variants, with Rest, Sleep Talk, and 2 attacking moves. The issue with this set is that while you get an attack boost from Guts, Facade sadly does not double in power from being asleep, only burned, paralyzed, or poisoned. So it's still a little fringe, and not the best thing you can use on a team, but a lot of options have been opened up for it thanks to the E-word. There's a level of pain seeing that despite the tools granted to it, Primeape isn't even on the top 5 on this list. Don't get me wrong, it's a fine Pokemon. In fact, it's so fine that he has been banned from Generation 9 PU. Sure, that's the lowest tier, but unlike some of the Pokemon before it, Primeape has actually gotten to be so good that it got to be banned from something. How is it holding up in NU? Not the best, but I'll take what I can get. Now, what does it do? Well, while its bulk isn't the best, people still have managed to use it for about what you'd expect. Some combination of moves like Taunt, Rest, Bulk Up, Drain Punch, and of course, Rage Fist. And god do I love Rage Fist. Anyways, what sadly holds it back is that, well, it's gotta use its Terra to be a solid defensive Pokemon. And unlike Big Papa Annihilate, Rage Fist isn't stab. So it takes you a bit longer to get that truly potent sweeper that you want so much. Regardless, I am still happy to see Primeape getting the buffs it deserves. So, how's it faring in national decks? Not great, but that's okay. At least it's good somewhere. I'll be honest, Scyther's typing is only going to continue to hold it back as the years go by and better Pokemon are introduced. Having to hold heavy-duty boots instead of the item practically designed for it is incredibly unfortunate to say the least, and it makes me sad. Losing Roost in Generation 9 also is a pretty low blow from Game Freak to do. But despite these shortcomings, it has found itself a pretty solid home in NU. While it isn't doing great in national decks, even with Roost, it is still definitely a very solid choice. Swords Dance, Technician, and stuff like Dual Wing Beat, Close Combat, Bug Bite, U-Turn, Defog, and Roost are things you really can't go wrong with if you want to use Scyther. It's also got really solid speed, but sadly, not solid enough anymore. While base 100 used to be considered the baseline, and is still solid nowadays, I've always noticed that some of the best offensive threats tend to be exactly faster than Infernape. Walking Wake, Iron Moth, and Ogerpon feel like the new speed benchmarks. And with Booster Energy to boost some of their speed even further, not even base 110 cuts it sometimes. So, sadly, for Scyther, while it does have amazing tools, it's just a little too slow nowadays to ever reach the higher tiers, where even Scizor now struggles. I mean, Porygon 2 was destined to join the greats up in the top 5. It's one of the best Trick Room setters of all time, and is one of the better bulky normal types. Access to stuff like Thunder Wave and Toxic, which it hasn't lost yet since it isn't in Gen 9, and then stuff like Recover, Trick Room, Ice Beam, and either Trace or Download, even Teleport for pivoting. Yeah, it's destined to always find a place. Not to mention, funny enough, in Gen 8, the last generation it was in, it actually outplaced Porygon Z in terms of usage, and wound up having a happy home in RU, while Porygon Z was an NUBL. While Porygon 2 isn't placed in national decks, and Porygon Z chills out in RUBL, thanks to its Z conversations going a little crazy, it is still basically agreed that Porygon 2 is better, because the threats it allows to come in on Trick Room, as well as being very good at whittling an enemy down, are always going to come in handy. I've grown rather fond of Gligar as of recent, more so than normal actually. I've always found it to be an incredibly solid hit taker when I goofed around with it. Access to Toxic, what was once Roost, and either access to all the hazards except for Sticky Web, or the power to remove them with Defog depending on what your team needs, gave Gligar a lot of useful tools. Ground and Flying is clearly an excellent typing, and Immunity may not be Toxic Heal, but it's still an excellent ability. In fact, in National decks, Gligar is tiered as UU. That isn't impressive until you look at Mons that are tiered below it. It is on the same footing as Mega Gardevoir and Mega Beedrill, and is tiered above the Mega Lati twins. That's right, Gligar is used more in National decks UU than the Lati twins, which just goes to show just how well Gligar of all Pokemon has aged. Now, how's it doing in Gen 9? It's in the NU tier actually, which, given that it's a non-evolved Pokemon, that's pretty good. If this were just Gen 9, Chansey would not be here sadly. It's currently chilling in PU because losing Toxic and Soft-Boiled PP really just did put the poor girl in a coffin. However, throughout the course of its competitive lifespan, it has been one of the greats, always tiering in UU or higher no matter what. It's been one of the greatest hit takers, and unfortunately very good on cringe stall. The ability to whittle down the enemy with stuff like Seismic Toss, Soft-Boiled, Toxic, and Stealth Rock is just that good. And Dit and Blissey have even traded places in OU from time to time, because the player base couldn't decide if Eviolite or Leftovers was better. Until Gen 8, where Blissey put on a nice pair of shoes, and the decision was made. However, the fact that it never dropped below UU until one of its most valuable tools was taken from it really goes to show how much of an impact that Chansey has had, and it deserves to be at least number 2. In National decks, it's still ranked UU, despite Mega Evolutions and Z-moves running around, combined with Terra to amp the power level. So, who's number 1 then? I promise to Arceus, this is not some dark type propaganda. This is a genuine belief I hold. Not only is this Pokemon ranked in Gen 9 RU and National Dex UU, but from Generation 6 to 8, this Pokemon was an amazing OU choice. It literally took Kingambit existing, who is insanely good, to knock Bisharp down a peg. And then it was fine in UU until the additional power creep rolled around to knock it down another peg, where it's still aging better than everything else on this list. Bisharp is an amazing Pokemon, and access to Knockoff and Defiant were absolutely some of the reason why back in the day, being able to punish Defog and slap someone's item off was absolutely absurd. And it's able to cover for its low speed with Sucker Punch. Losing Knockoff was a massive blow, but people managed to make it work as a Stealth Rock setter who resisted Rapid Spin and punished Defog with increased damage. I don't need to go too deep into detail here, because the rest is pretty obvious. Bisharp is absolutely the greatest NFV, and I don't think there's any real competition. It's got the stats, it's got the typing, it's got the moves and ability, and it's got the exact niche it's needed to fill for years that keeps us coming back to it in times of need. Bisharp, thank you so much for your years of competitive service. And that's it. That's what I got. However, rather than leaving or asking where on this list do you want to see a different Pokemon, I got a better one. What Pokemon do you think desperately need an evolution? Nothing with a Mega, of course, since Game Freak isn't gonna let that happen. For instance, I think that Vespiquen actually isn't good enough. It's time for Vespa Monarch, and you give it a bug and steel typing so that way it can be good like Scizor. I promise you I have good ideas. But speaking of NFEs now, it's about time that I get the old Sneasel out of the box and go lose it NU. See ya!